Okay, we're ready. Okay, thank you, councillors. I'd like to declare the ordinary meeting of Blaney Shire Council for March open, and thank you all very much for your attendance. In opening this meeting, I'd like to recognise the traditional custodians of this land, the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging. Councillors, as you know, this meeting is being recorded, and I'd like to make note that any members of the public that are here this evening may be recorded as well as part of these proceedings. Apologies for non-attendance. I believe everybody is accounted for, Madam GM. We have no public forum. We have no mayoral minute. Confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 17th of the 2nd. Do I have a mover? That is a true record. Councillor Ewan has moved that way and Councillor Newstead has seconded that. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, any matters arising from those minutes? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just one quick question with regard to the Drought Communities Program. Any indication from the Australian Government on when we may get the green light for those 12 projects?
Madam GM, would you like to comment?
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, we don't have any advice yet when the draft funding agreement would be coming through or if the projects have been improved yet.
Thank you, Councillor. No other questions or comments regards to those minutes. I'll now draw your attention to item 2, page 14, Tourism Event Development Fund application. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Somervale has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Any questions or comments? I believe there is a slight amendment to the event that's planned for Newbridge. I believe that has been cancelled. Is that correct, Madam GM?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we were advised this morning that the Newbridge Progress Association's Winter Solstice Festival has been postponed or cancelled. As a result, that will not be required to be request for funding.
The mover and seconder comfortable with that? Any questions or comments in regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've just got a question that I'll probably put on notice to consider. With COVID-19 and the impact that it's having, with the remaining funds, and we did approve a previous event that I'm not quite sure whether it's still going ahead or not in Carcoar from the previous month, given that most of the Food Week events are off, but whether we as a council could look at if some of these costs so far to run their events, whether we could look at using some of the remaining funds, and I'm unsure if any do, but to support those events that they've had to call the event off because of COVID-19. So it's more a question on notice or a comment on notice that we could investigate it, and if we do get any applications to maybe consider it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. It's something that Blaney Shire Council is very sensitive of. As we know, there's going to be very difficult times in the next few weeks, and we certainly sincerely hope that our community and the larger community stays very safe in the next few weeks. But as far as all these events are concerned, I would think that we'd do absolutely everything that we possibly could, not only to support the events or the organisations that have been postponed, but to make sure that we're ready to support strongly the events into the future when we get through this community health crisis, and Blaney Shire Council will stand ready to certainly strongly support these events, hopefully in the near future. But we will look at what we can do as an ongoing issue. Any other questions or comments in regards to this? Councillor Somervale.
Just to make one comment, Mr Mayor, in relation to Millfest. Of course, that's a fair way off, and let's hope that's not going to be disrupted. Apart from the $500 here, councillors will have also noticed that one of the recommendations from the Financial Assistance Committee is a grant of $5,300 for festoon lights for Pym Street, which will be used for that festival as well if council approves it. So, following on your point just a moment ago, council is giving a fair bit of support to that particular event.
Excellent, and we look forward to it being held. Okay, councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through to item 3, page 17. As the minutes of the Blaney Shire Tourism, Towns and Village Committee meeting held on the 25th of February. Recommendation there that be received and noted. Do I have a mover for this? Thank you. Councillor Denton has moved. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. Questions or comments? Councillors, in regards to this item, these minutes? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 4, page 22, report of council investments as at the 29th of February. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Thank you. Councillor Kingham has moved that way and Councillor Somervale, I believe, has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this report of council investments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's good to see that our total investments have gone back up to around 14 million from under 12 million, since I think it was one of the loans, but I'll just ask that the reason that we have taken out a loan to for Centrepoint to build our reserves back up again?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr Director.
Through, Mr Mayor. That's correct, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, councillors, regards to this item? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Declared carried. Councillors, item 5, page 27, Youth Week 2020. Recommendation there that those 3 events be supported. Do I have a mover? Councillor Reynolds, thank you, has moved that way, and Councillor Somervale has seconded. Any questions or comments in regards to these items? Councillor Reynolds.
A question again with COVID-19, given that they are potentially coming up shortly. If they're cancelled, does the club lose that fund, or could it potentially hold those funds, or is it a part of the funding criteria that they have to spend the funds within the month that Youth Week is taking place?
Yes, so there's a question that's been raised. Councillor,
Through
Mr Director.
Through, Mr Mayor. It is a requirement of funding that the funds are expended for an event during Youth Week. We've received no advice from the funding body of if an event is cancelled, but obviously we're liaising with event organisers to ascertain whether those events will still proceed. So, yeah, at this point, look, we've received no advice, so in answer to your question, yes, that they'd have to be expended in that week of Youth Week.
A supplementary then, Mr Mayor. If they can't hold an event, can they spend it for something else in that club, or is it it has to be used on that particular activity that's outlined here in this report?
I'd certainly like to see it spent, that's for sure, Councillor Reynolds. Mr Director.
Sorry, I missed the question, Councillor Reynolds.
Is there an alternative activity that could be spent on Youth Week project if they weren't to go ahead? Like, could be another event that's maybe not as
We'll certainly
low-key?
we will certainly be endeavour to be flexible. As I said, the funding is auspiced by Family Community Services, and we have to match it. So subject to the advice from Family Community Services. However, look, it's likely that we'd be flexible in holding the event later on.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments regards this item? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 6, page 29, Blaney Residential Development Project, land sale. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Somervale has moved that way. Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Any questions or comments, councillors, regards to this item? The block of land sold. Councillor Kingham.
Mr Mayor, I'd like an explanation of the paragraph under budget implications. I don't understand that. It says about the net proceeds being used for one, and then the proceeds from land sales held as restricted cash. An explanation of how all that's going to be treated.
Mr Director.
Through Mr Mayor, Council has had a policy of net proceeds from land sales being restricted to the property account for the purpose of property development. So the surplus proceeds after cost of sale and the cost of the land would be proposed to be restricted by council.
So the first and second sentences are meaning the same thing. To me, it's going into two different buckets.
The income needs to be brought to account. So the income will be brought to account into council's financials. However, that cash will then be restricted. So you're referring to the second sentence? Net proceeds after purchase costs, development costs and associated costs will be brought to account as income. So we bring to account that income in our financials, and then we assess the cost of sale and the like, determine the net proceeds and that net cash. So we're talking now cash, not the net profit on the sale. The net cash is held aside for future property development, rather than the money going to general revenue.
I asked Mr. Mayor the next quarterly review statement that some sort of figures are provided to explain all this, because it's beyond my comprehension as to how both of those things mean the same thing. To me, it looks as though it's going into different funds. What's the difference between the proceeds held as restricted cash and residual funds held for future land development? To me, it doesn't mean two different things.
Well, Councillor King, I'm sure it would be a good opportunity to have some more information on that. Obviously, it needs a bit of clarity where it ends up. So I think we'll take that on notice, and certainly I think all councillors would be interested in the further information. Thank you. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this project? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Probably just a follow on from Councillor Kingham, but if we do make a profit out of each individual block sale, that will actually improve our bottom line for the financial year to the director.
That's correct. Although we have made forecasts of based on number of sales in our financials.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 7, page 31, the amendment to the fraud control policy is a recommendation there. Do I have a mover? Councillor Somervale has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. Questions or comments? Councillor Somervale?
I'll just make a comment because it's an audit-related matter, Mr. Mayor. The New South Wales Audit Office has told us that we need not just a policy, which we have, but we need a plan as well. So this draft plan has been passed by the Audit Committee at its last meeting and commented on by the Audit Committee, so it now needs to be approved by Council and go on public exhibition.
Thank you for that explanation. Councillor Somervale. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I congratulate that we have developed this policy, and particularly in covering both internal and external potential fraud for the organisation. So it's quite a comprehensive document that hopefully protects the organisation, protects from any forms of fraud, but there's always a risk that someone will still undertake fraudulent activities against the council or staff. So hopefully this goes a long way to protecting the organisation.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments, councillors? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, thank you, councillors. Now draw your attention to item 8, page 44, and that's the minutes of the Financial Assistance Committee meeting held 3rd of March. Do I have a mover? Councillor Somervale has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Denton has seconded that. Questions or comments? Councillor Somervale.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, as chair of this committee, I might just make a couple of comments by way of explanation. The second paragraph of the recommendation is a suggestion that council reviews the amount of the annual donations we give to two large events, the Carcoar Australia Day Fair and the Millthorpe Markets. Councillors, if they've looked closely at the schedule of recommendations, will see that the annual Section 356 donations are now up to about 63,000 for the year. And I know when I first started chairing this committee in the previous council, it was $50,000 to allocate for community projects, and $50,000 was separately dealt with under as Section 356 in the operating plan. They've all been incorporated into the one program, so it's now $100,000. The amount of the donations for waiver of rates and charges and grants for community events and so on has gone from 50,000 to 63,000, which means that the balance of the $100,000 for community projects, which was $50,000, is now down to $37,000. The thought would be quite appropriate now would be to look at particularly the two large contributions towards community events, which are now pretty well established community events, the Carcoar Australia Day Fair and the Millthorpe Markets. Between them, some $12,000 support from council, and the suggestion that the committee has is that we should cap all donations to $2,000, and if event organisers are looking for a greater contribution to their events, then that needs to be substantiated with financials in terms of how profitable the events are and so on. Because I think the committee felt that those events probably can stand on their own now, and some of that money can be freed up to fall into the community projects part of the financial assistance program.
Thank you very much for that explanation, Councillor Somerville. Any questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll foreshadow an amendment, but before I do have a question. So my foreshadowed amendment is actually to remove 2, 3 and 4 from this recommendation. But the question I have before that is who is actually reviewing? When it says council review, what is the intent of the review, or how would this process go about given that there seems to be already a foregone conclusion from the committee that anything above $2,000 should be exempted?
Question.
Maybe I could respond to that. The way this would happen is that when we develop the operating plan for next year and the schedule of donations and contributions to community events is included in the budget, and the budget comes up to council for approval, staff will either be putting in $2,000 cap for events, or they'll be putting in current amounts for events, and then it's up to council as to whether at that stage council accepts either $2,000 as a cap or whatever the actual existing contribution is. So this is just a suggestion from the committee that in developing the operating plan for next year, we look closely at, and this is just for events, it's not for the other part of the donations, which is for waiver of council rates and garbage fees and sewer fees and so on, and contribution to insurance. It's just for the events part of it. So it'll come back to council. If this recommendation is adopted, it'll come back to council during the course of developing the operation plan, and probably be debated in a workshop before it gets to the full council meeting.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. Very clear explanation. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I do potentially move for an amendment, putting on my hat as the chair of the Tourism Town and Villages Committee, it does concern me that we're trying to discourage the major events. And, you know, for example, the Millthorpe Market's 8 to 10,000. It's been cancelled, like so many events in our shire. And the Carcool Running Festival, again, many thousands of people coming in. I would be very concerned if we started to pull back or reduce the level of support for probably the two biggest events in our shire now, in introducing this recommendation. While it will be up to council at a workshop whether they support or not, I really think that this sends a really bad message to our events that, oh, if you're too successful, so don't be too successful because council will take some money off you. Whereas we should be looking to encourage events like this. So with that in mind, I'd like to foreshadow that we now move that we remove number 2, 3 and 4 from this recommendation, so it would stand as 1, 5 and 6, if I do have a seconder, to then put it out to further debate.
Councillor Reynolds has moved an amendment to the recommendation. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Reynolds' amendment?
Can I ask Councillor Reynolds just one point of clarification?
Yes.
He's suggesting we remove paragraphs 2, 3 and 4, I think. It's 2 and 3 that relate to the caps on events. 4 is just a procedural a motion and ultimately a resolution just endorsing what the General Manager has done under delegation related to the events.
What are your
Sorry, I
thoughts?
apologise. I'll just 2 and 3.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reynolds has moved an amendment to exclude recommendation 2 and 3. Is that correct? Just confirming. And before we discuss that amendment, I'm looking for a seconder for the amendment. Okay, we have no seconder, so the amendment lapses. So we're going to go back to the original recommendation. Is there any questions or comments, further questions or comments in regards to these recommendations? Councillor Kingham.
Mr. Mayor, it appears to me as though there's a vacancy on the committee. It's true. What steps are being taken to fill that vacancy?
Vacancy, I wasn't aware of a vacancy on the,
No,
to the chair.
I don't think there's a
Question
vacancy
to
on
the
the
chair.
committee. There was a vacancy during the term of this council when, what was her name, the lady who stood for council last time,
Bunny Sky.
went off and left the Shire and went down to Tasmania, created a vacancy, but that's been filled by council advertising, and we accepted an application from Kerry Adams, so she's filled that spot. So I don't think there's a vacancy.
Thank you, Councillor Val. Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Any other questions or comments, councillors? If not, we have a mover, we have a seconder. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Right.
Against?
And may I have it noted, please?
Yes, please. No problem. Councillor Reynolds, show the minutes, voted against the recommendations. Thank you, councillors. Declare the motion carried. Item 9, page 49, minutes of the Blaney Shire Audit Risk and Improvement Committee meeting held 4th of March. Recommendations there 1, 2 and 3. Councillor Somervale has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead, thank you. Second that.
Mr Mayor,
Councillor Somervale.
whilst I've moved the recommendations, I'd like to move the recommendations without paragraph 3.
You'd like to delete paragraph 3 as the mover?
Yes, I have. I've spoken to the director during the course of today, and I'll just explain why I'm not including that in what I want to move.
Thank you.
The meaning of paragraph 3 might be a little bit obscure to councillors who are not on the audit, audit committee. SCAR, of course, is the Southern Cadia Access route, and the recommendation was a recommendation which came out of an audit we did on our project management for that big project, and the recommendation had to do with conducting a post-completion safety audit on how the road was performing in a safety sense. Audit committee recommended that we go ahead with that, and the management response to that was not deemed a value proposition. Now, that was, and the Audit Committee have said, no, we want an explanation of why it wasn't deemed a value proposition. So it's a matter just in the Audit Committee at the moment. When a response comes back to the Audit Committee explaining why it was said not to be a value proposition, then the Audit Committee will say, will either accept the explanation and that'll be the end of it, or the Audit Committee will say, no, we think you should go ahead with that, in which case it may well come back to Council at that stage. So I don't think item 3 is a matter for Council at this stage, which is why I'm not including that in the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Somervale. Ask the seconder, happy to have that deleted. Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Councillors, it's any questions or comments? I think it's a pretty reasonable explanation Councillor has put forward. Happy to take any questions or comments? No? Okay. So we've amended the recommendation. We're back down to 1 and 2, which has been moved by Councillor Somervale, second by Councillor Newstead. No other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 10, page 53, the Director of Infrastructure Services Monthly Report. There's a recommendation there, councillors. This report be received and noted. Thank you. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way and Councillor Kingham has seconded that. Questions or comments, councillors? Their favourite report of the meeting? Councillor Reynolds.
Yeah, some real positives coming out of particularly the Bulubula meeting that was held, the Bulubula Walkway meeting, community engagement a week or so ago. Got a good turnout on a very wet afternoon, which was also great to see, inches of rain. Yeah, some good community feedback that hopefully we'll, as a council, now be able to implement. And some people saw it, some landholders saw it for the first time, that were directly connected with that walkway. So positive there that we're engaging and consulting with the community. Forestry East Road, I can report that it has been now sealed. And I drove on it coming to council this afternoon, and very nice job that has been done by staff, and quite nice and wide too, which is also very good because there were some concerns, particularly around the intersection. Council staff have done their best to try and get as wide a road as they possibly can, particularly around that intersection with Spring Terrace Road. The Blake Street footpath in Millthorpe has also been completed, with some dirt put on that in the last day or two to smooth it off. I did get some feedback at the show about the quality of roadworks that were actually done, particularly on Kalula Road. A resident of that road said that they were very impressed with the quality of grading, the best that they've ever seen, and it's a shame that Bathurst Regional Council doesn't do the same on the other end. So yeah,
We'll look into that, Councillor Reynolds.
yes, we can show Bathurst Regional Council how well we perform as a council. So it was nice to get some positive feedback from a member of the community about that. And also, finally, the wastewater plant. It's a great concept, and I know our staff are working very hard to try and get that wastewater plant up and running as soon as possible, looking at the cost and the project to develop that. And it's, I think, particularly important with the current capacity of both Lake Rowlands and Orange's water supply that are getting quite low, that there may be an alternate source of water, particularly for industry and to allow industry to grow. So I strongly encourage staff and council to continue on that project and hopefully get it up in the spring of this year, so that if we don't get the substantial rainfall, that we do have an alternate source of water, particularly for industry, to allow industry to continue to develop, and particularly the concrete industry as one example that hopefully this can be used for. So some real positive initiatives and outcomes from this report and from our infrastructure staff.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. A pretty good summary of the Director's report. Councillor Kingham.
Two questions to the Director. Firstly, the Bundaroo Bridge, where are we up to as the bridge is only servicing Cowra residents and looks as though it's up to us to supply a replacement bridge? And secondly, the very last sentence on the report, I'm just wondering about where that auction's being held and how do we save freight?
Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Two questions, Director.
Through you, Mr.
Bridge and-
Through you, Mr. Mayor. With regards to the Boondaroo Road bridge crossing into Cowra Shire, we have lodged our request for a natural disaster declaration with the Department of Justice. We have to wait for that to occur, and I'm sure with current things going on, they're probably a little swamped with other stuff. Once that is declared, then we will start to process things through Transport for New South Wales with regards to claims for emergency works that we've already undertaken to make roads safe and so forth, and the wet crossing type or the emergency crossing we put in place, and also to reach an agreement following sort of inspections and so forth with them as to progressing the replacement of the bridge. With regards to the last sentence, we would ordinarily send our plant through to Pickles in Dubbo, which is where they would be auctioned off. So they would come down with a semi-trailer or however many, and they would float them back to Pickles.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Councillor Newstead.
Quickly, I think it'd be remiss of us not to mention the soft opening of the Central West Equestrian and Livestock Centre on Saturday at the show. Although the rain was appreciated, it would have been nice if it could have come a bit later, but it showed what we can do with that big building. I'll be honest, I wasn't overly keen at the beginning. I was a bit, I don't know, I didn't know how to go, but that proved on Saturday that it's going to be a pretty good building, I think. So,
Thank you,
well
Councillor.
done to Charlie and Council, and it looked fantastic.
Thank you. You're correct. Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Any other questions or comments regards Director's report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to follow on to Councillor Kingham's question with regard to the damage to the Director, is there any indication of how much it's actually cost Council to do the works? And I assume it would be a total guesstimate, but how much it would be cost to replace this bridge?
At this moment, Councillor, I recall a figure of approximately $80,000 on the works associated with roads, but we've put a figure of $500,000 on the bridge.
The supplementary, Mr. Mayor, if I may, would we get 100% or 50%, or what percentage of that could we potentially get if it is declared a natural disaster?
Had the bridge not been identified as an issue, there would have been no value in seeking a disaster declaration because of the federal government's disaster arrangements. We have to pay a certain dollar value. It's not a percentage, it's a value, and we wouldn't have triggered that level. I would have to take on notice what the actual level is and how much we would have to spend. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to the Director's report? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through to item 11, page 57. That's the minutes of the Blaney Traffic Committee meeting, which was held electronically. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way and Councillor Denton has seconded that. Questions or comments in regards to these minutes? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're approving this on the proviso that it does go ahead, or these events, because there are a number of them, 5 events over the remainder of the year. But again, I don't think Council, and I'll go back to the Director, has heard whether they will still go ahead or not, or whether it'll be a month-by-month basis.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my expectation is that these would go ahead. They're routine weekly events. They have low numbers of people. They're all out on the road. They're not in a confined space or anything like that.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Council's now move through to item 12, page 58, the minutes of the Blaney Shire Sports Council meeting held Thursday the 20th of February. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Thank you. Councillor Newstead has moved that way and Councillor Kingham has seconded.
Mr Mayor, this
Councillor
meeting
Kingham.
was actually chaired by Councillor Newstead. I was present, but Councillor Newstead actually chaired it. Do we need to note that, or is it okay as written?
My apologies.
Happy to note that, Councillor Kingham, for sure. In the interests of accuracy. So, councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to these minutes? Obviously, a fair bit going on. A lot going on, actually, which is really interesting. And I note the opportunity the Sports Council is doing to revisit the master plan, I guess, and the strategic direction of that committee. So pretty important to keep reviewing and making sure it's still relevant. Okay, councillors, no other questions or comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through to item 13, page 62, and it's minutes of the Blaney Shire Access Advisory Committee held 27th of February. Do I have recommendations? Thank you. Councillor Denton has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. Questions or comments? Thank you. Councillor Denton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Let me say that I'm happy to report that the Access Advisory Committee has met again. I see it as the shining star of Blaney Council's committees with respect to my chairs of their respective committees. As I mentioned in the last meeting in this place, the Access Committee is an extremely motivated and dedicated committee, and I'm happy to present the recommendations. And these recommendations are important in that many of them have to do with prevention, which I'm pleased to say that some of which are in the vein that goes straight to point recommendation 6, which is the committee's wholeheartedly support of the action plan. And so I thought I would just go a little bit out of order with that and bring that up to the forefront. Coming back to recommendation 1, Mr Mayor, the Access Committee is looking at the funding opportunities that may be out there to increase the access to what is going to be the jewel of our Shire, being Centrepoint. And I'm happy with the opportunity to say that I have personally written to the Disability Minister, Gareth Ward, looking at some options to do under the Division 4 of the Disability Inclusion Act, which covers financial assistance, and I'm awaiting a reply. With regard to recommendation 2 and 3, I'm excited at the planned upgrade to our library. I look forward to those improvements. I do, however, would like some clarification on recommendation 3 from Director Dicker, if I could get that, please.
Clarification around item recommendation 3, in particular,
Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that I believe the front entrance is included as part of that stage 1.
Thank you. So, yep, correct, Councillor Denton. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, looking at recommendation 4, and this is to do with access to the National Australia Bank in Adelaide Street. It's my understanding that there has been some movement on that, and that the owner of the premises has contacted council, and that I do understand that there are heritage concerns with that, and it's my understanding that access concerns along with heritage concerns will work hand in hand. Again, I'm hoping to get some clarification off Director Dicker if there has been any movement on that front.
Mr. Director?
Mr. Mayor, I can confirm we currently have a pre-development application application being made, so that's where they seek general comments before they actually lodge. That is literally being assessed, but I also note it's probably the third or fourth in probably the last 3 or 4 years as well.
Good news. Okay, so looking at recommendation 6, look, Mr. Mayor, I would actually, and this is to do with the DFIB, recommendation 5, sorry, Mr. Mayor. I've got the right one here, yep. Mr. Mayor, I would like to take this back to the committee on reflection. I believe that that we need to look at a overall strategy and funding opportunities to go with that. However, I believe that it may fall outside the purview of the actual Access Committee and may require a deeper examination. With permission, I would like to actually make an amendment that I do take that back to the committee for another look.
Thank you, Councillor Denton. We could just amend that or indeed delete it. I think what's probably the best way, Madam GM, is to delete it. I think, thank you for that explanation. Yeah, it does seem a little bit vague, so it would be nice to see a little bit more clarity around what the Access Committee's thinking about how that might be delivered and the outcomes. So if you're proposing as the mover then to delete that, Councillor Reynolds, are you happy to support that? Thank you. Let the recommendation show that that has been deleted. Okay, is there anything else, Councillor Denton?
And, Mr. Mayor, if I may, the last point being point 7, this is to do with the $250 travel concession. The committee felt that those in regional areas, look, it may be advantageous to use this towards community transport, based on limited options that many people have in areas, regional areas, and I'd be happy to support that if we could move that, please, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Right to the Minister. Thank you. Okay, Councillor, pretty good overview. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, fully endorse what Councillor Denton has said. While I'm happy to send it back and have agreed to send back, my understanding of the intention of the Access Committee, and we'll seek clarification at its next meeting, with regard to the defibrillators was to actually try and identify, so if there was an issue, a heart attack in the main street or somewhere else, that there was some form of signage so that people could go, there's a defibrillator there, someone run to, whether it's the council administration building or other buildings in Blaney or Millthorpe or Carcoar or anywhere else to access a defibrillator. So the identification, particularly out on the street, is a bit hard, but we'll seek further clarification and come back to council after the next Access Committee meeting. And then who funds that identification, etc., is another challenge to find there. Going to the library, and I think what's being proposed, and hopefully we will potentially see some funding in the near future for that particular project. A lot of concern about particularly the entry access, but also the toilet, which is well down the back. So if we can expedite that project so that we can actually get a very modern, accessible library, it'd be wonderful. So hopefully we in the near future might be able to get some form of grant assistance for that one. I think that's all. And the challenge with the National Australia Bank is that it's private property and it's an already existing purpose, so it's very hard to get changes if the owner doesn't want to make changes. So hopefully we can get a positive response from the owner of that, and improve access for National Australia Bank customers to that facility.
Absolutely, Councillor Reynolds, I certainly agree it is a critical issue, but I do know that they're very willing to facilitate a better access to that building, an important building in our streetscape. Of course, and we're certainly very committed to increasing or improving the facility at the library as well. Councillor Newstead.
Just in regards to the NAB Bank, I just wonder what their thinking is when they've put a NAB flexi-teller machine in the front of Blaney Real Estate. So maybe they're not keen, the owner's not keen to have anything done.
My understanding is that all parties are very willing to facilitate a better entrance into that heritage listed building, so which is good news, but it is a difficult project.
The only thing I've had a few comments from people saying, well, what's going on? Why is the flexi teller down there? Are they going to close the branch and all that kind of thing? So it did get tongues wagging a bit.
No, I think you are going to see an investment in that building by the current tenant, so which is all good news.
Well, I was told that Kathy knew nothing about it. If you were talking about the flexi teller, she said they just turned up and put it in. So it must have been done through Mick Hickey or Michael Hickey. So
I don't know.
It was just interesting, I thought.
Improved access is what we're here for, and that we're very supportive of, to improve access right across our shire. Okay, councillors, we're still on this report. There's now 6 recommendations, not 7. It's been moved by Councillor Denton and seconded by Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments? This very important committee of council. If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Okay, councillors, now to item 14, page 66, the minutes of the Blaney Shire Cemetery Forum, held on the 27th of February. Recommendations there 1 to 6. Have a move. Councillor Kingham would like to move these recommendations. We'll have a seconder. Councillor Newstead also would like to second that. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Kingham, would you like to...
Several things there, Mr Chairman. Firstly, in relation to the minutes, present, Mitchell Groves was there at the meeting. He came late, but he was present, so that probably should be added. He wasn't there at the beginning, but he did come.
Okay, so he's not down as apology, so we'll amend the minutes to say he was there, yep.
Yeah, it was a very thorough meeting. I think we'd all agree that the representation was complete of the cemeteries except for Carcoar. Now, Jeff's not at all well, and we'll need to do something about getting another representative from Carcoar. What we really did discuss in great detail was the state of the Blaney Cemetery. We had a presentation from Mrs Howarth, who's had 2 family members buried in the cemetery, in the Lawn Cemetery. And Councillor Newstead had photographs of some of the work that was less than satisfactory at the cemetery, and we all agree that there was a lot of graves that have been derelict and probably can't be replaced. And the recommendation here is that we consider putting plaques there and disposing of the waste of some of those grave sites. But there's also a great deal of work needs to be done on the Lawn Cemetery. A lot of comment was made that it's really just grass. It's not really a lawn cemetery. And the recommendation you'll see there is that we consider top dressing it and putting some native grasses in that area. And there has been considerable angst about the use of Roundup on the Lawn Cemetery next to the headstones. And we're asking the council to consider not using that. They'll probably have to do something alternative like a whippersnipper. So it was a very comprehensive meeting, and there's quite a few recommendations there that I'd like the endorsement of the council.
Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First question is with regard to the draft cemetery management plan. Is that just for Blaney or is that for all of our cemeteries?
Sorry, Mr Director?
Mr Mayor, I believe it's for all cemeteries across the Blaney Shire.
Thank you.
Second
Mr.
question,
Reynolds?
Mr Mayor. With regard to damage in Millthorpe, the Millthorpe Village Committee is keen to try and get a couple of the headstones that have been severely damaged or warped because of rabbit damage repaired. I assume, given you had a large focus on the Blaney Cemetery at the last forum, whether you could potentially put that on the agenda of the next cemetery for a meeting to have a look at damage, but also the comments back to me that if we don't do something on a larger scale, i.e. maybe fencing the rabbits out, that we're just going to continually have the same problem emerge. There was a huge number of rabbits in the Millthorpe area come, it was early this year, January of this year, huge number on Victoria Road of an evening, probably 40 or 50 rabbits you would see. We seem to have done something, or they seem to have been controlled, but they seem to keep coming back. So more just asking whether the Cemetery Forum could potentially have a look at a future Cemetery Forum meeting, at damage, but also at potentially longer term mitigation that might include a fence across the front and rabbit-proof fencing around the perimeter as a longer term goal to try and lower the risk or lower the damage from rabbits in that cemetery.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr Director, like to comment?
In response to Councillor Reynolds' questions or comments, rabbits is a never-ending beast. We are now a bit ahead of it. We've had a significant program running in January and also in Blaney in December. There are a couple of graves that I'm aware of in Millthorpe. I know of one in particular that's moved, and my understanding is that's because the stonemason has put the stonework on before they should have, and as such has skewed that grave. I'm aware of that one. I think it does raise a wider question on it. It probably gets to recommendation 2. How wide do we go? We could put substantial amount of funds in the restoration of graves and stuff like that, but is that our responsibility? Is it our asset? I don't, point 2, are we even able to do point 2? I don't even know. I think we need to probably do a bit more research before we probably back ourselves into that corner and do that work. So just because a cemetery doesn't mean it's Blaney Shire Council's responsibility to look after that gravesite forever. Additionally, I know there's some other matters down points 4 and 5. Points 4, yep, we'll get in topsoil, dress and seed. The use of chemicals, though, it's a mixture. We don't have the viability or the resources to go and whippersnipper every single grave at the moment. It's reactive as well. We've come out, back end of a drought, we've had good rain and good growth. It's about balancing as well. So.
Thank you, Mr Director. Yep, totally understand. These are issues that keep coming up over the years. I guess I just have a question, Councillor Kingham. I'm just a little bit uncertain about item 6 or recommendation 6. I'm not sure about what sort of information that could be prepared. That's haven't come across that issue. And why has that been put to council?
When Mrs Howarth addressed the committee, she made the point that people pay $2,750 and they wish to order a grave site, and there's nothing given to them as to what that responsibility or what responsibilities they have, or what owners or what the council will provide. So we just need to have a looking for more information, and I'm unaware of it. I've not been a party to any of this,
it's a new one to
just
me.
wanting for an information leaflet to be given out with the money that's paid. Councillor Newstead might have a better understanding.
Thank you, Councillor Kingham. I'll now ask Councillor Newstead, who was chairing this committee, to comment.
What she was asking was that she wanted to do a couple of things up there, but she was told she wasn't allowed to. But in saying that, there's other people had put things in front of the headstones in the lawn cemetery, which is not meant to happen. What she was saying, she would like something that just says what you're allowed to do, how big a plaque you can put in there, you know, what the restrictions are more than anything, because she was told she wasn't allowed to do things. But if you go up there and have a look, you'll see a few of the headstones, and they've got flowers and little boxes in front of them on the lawn section. So that's what she was kind of trying to ask, that when you go and pay for your plot or whatever, you're given a bit of an idea before what you can do. So, and I agree with it, because, and we were discussing too, what do you do about the ones that have already built little boxes and put angels and everything like that in front of the thing, because it's supposed to be lawn. Well, and that was the other question, is it a lawn cemetery or is it not a lawn cemetery? And just going back to Mark's comment about the roundup, we weren't talking about the whole cemetery, we're just talking about where the headstone sits on what you call the plinth. If you go up there and have a look, and right nearly along it is just brown dirt, and it looks terrible. Surely, there's not that many there, surely it wouldn't take more than a couple of hours or an hour just to whip a snip straight up along those things, just to make it look like it's a... I've seen other lawn cemeteries and they have the grass going right up to the plinth, or up to where the headstones sit. And just looks terrible, really. And as far as the derelict grave sites, this was I went up and took photos. If we don't know who owns them, or you can't contact them, surely we can clean it up a bit and, like we've stated, put a plaque or something there. Not a $1,000 plaque or anything, just to say, well, this was who was there, because it just looks really bad up there. That's my concern anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Newstead. And yes, look, it's been an ongoing concern forever, really, the maintenance of... We have some of the most oldest and historic cemeteries in New South Wales, and it's always an ongoing issue. But my first read of it is there's some significant personal, family and heritage issues involved in council getting involved in grave sites. So to see that the recommendation is that we really do investigate all the potential pitfalls, if you like, of course there is lots of graves there. We obviously need to contact families if we did decide to start altering them or repairing them. There is something that there's a fair bit of work around the heritage. We do not want to start putting plaques on things that aren't accurate. So I understand the intent, but I think there's a lot of work to do, so we really understand the scope and the depth of what the work is involved in doing this. And once we start, the expectation of the community can be quite high, which may be difficult to match.
There's just some graves up there that just could never ever possibly...
Correct.
Looks like mine. Oh no, I better not say. I was going to say something, but...
Yeah, well, I think the point is to investigate it. There's obviously, it's an issue that's been raised. It's fair and reasonable that we should look at what is quite a complicated and sensitive issue, I believe. In regards to item 6, I guess normally people would either, through the funeral directors, have this information, or indeed would contact council and receive this information. Is that not happening? Is there a missing link in the information that people are getting? Mr. Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not aware. This is the first time this has been raised, so I'm not aware, having spoken to administration, as they explain that to people when they do come to the counter. We've got to remember it's a highly emotive state normally when it does occur. Most are through our funeral homes though, so most of our funeral homes, they're aware there's only a couple around that we deal with, and also our stonemason. There's only one stonemason between Emu Plains and Broken Hill that does most of them anyway. So my understanding is most people are aware. We normally don't go up there with the big stick if there's a couple of flowers here and there. Normally not. So yeah, my understanding was the information is communicated as best possible. We need an information sheet. So it's going to take a fair bit, but is there.
Right, thank you. So this is a new issue out of the many issues in our cemeteries that have just been presented by our cemetery forum. I guess just trying to get in my head understanding what Councillor King was saying, that when people come to council, they're not getting the information or they're just getting it verbally, and you feel a sheet that they would take home would be more beneficial than the information they get at the counter? Is that...
That's my understanding, is that not having been a party to any of these transactions, but I'm at, as you say, it's a fairly emotional time, and some reassurance of what they get for the $2,750 would be appreciated.
Okay, well, I'd say in the interest of moving things along, at the very least, council should investigate what it would take to produce a current, some sort of handout, and just see if that was what indeed the general public need, either at the point of when they do purchase a gravesite or years later when they might need one, an unplanned one all of a sudden. So if council's happy to, we should at least look at that, investigate the accuracy of it, the cost of it, and if it really is something that... Councillor Somerville?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, this is an important issue, I think, because the rest of the recommendations simply suggest to council that they investigate something or they consider something. This one actually says that council prepares it. So it's different from all the other recommendations.
Right.
My view on that is I agree with Councillor King, and I think if people are, in the interests of both the people who are paying their money to get a gravesite and the interests of council, just clarifying what our obligations are and preparing a 1 or a 2 pager will help crystallise what the customer's expectations are and what the obligation. I think as a matter of good practice, it sounds like a good idea. So even though this is a direction to council to actually prepare this.
It is, correct.
And it's unusual to be voting in favour of this sort of thing without a recommendation from the staff, and when the director is saying this is the first he's heard of it, normally you wouldn't pass this sort of resolution without knowing what the staff think about it, but I can't see that there's any particular reason for not doing it.
Well, I would imagine that whatever was produced would have to be endorsed by the Cemetery Forum at the very least. So there's a bit of a process without sounding too bureaucratic. It's important that information is the information that the Cemetery Forum believes it needs to have on behalf of the community in relation to that. So by the adoption of this, I think at the very least, council produces a draft of what that might look like. I'll obviously present it to the next Cemetery Forum for comment. Does our members of that committee think that's fair and reasonable? There's no point producing a document that the forum doesn't support. I guess that will be the intent of item 6, if it's supported by councillors. Councillor Newstead?
I don't think it needs to be a two or 3 page thing. I think it's just a quick story of what you can do up there. And what you get for your $2,500. It doesn't have to be 3 pages long, does it, David? It's just, you know.
Yeah, and I think the intent is, as the director said, that the staff need to prepare something and submit it to the next meeting of the Cemetery Forum for discussion and an approval or recommendation to the full council.
Because we want to get it right, because it is very sensitive, but we want to be accurate and we want to be straight up. Okay. Any other discussion or comments regards to all these items? Have good understanding? Excellent. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, councillors, we do have one item to be considered in closed committee. So in accordance with the Local Government Act 93 and the Local Government General Regulation 2005, in the opinion of the General Manager, the following business is of a kind as referred to in section 10.2 of the Act and should be dealt with in part of the meeting closed to the media and public. It's item 15, land purchase opportunity. Do I have a mover that we go into closed committee? Councillor Reynolds. Seconder, Councillor Denton. Thank you. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. We now move into Is the microphone working? Yes, it is. Okay, thank you, councillors. We now are back into open council. I'll now read out the resolution of the confidential report. Land purchase opportunity. The recommendation is that council approve the general manager to investigate the purchase of 114 Adelaide Street, Blaney. Right, thank you, councillors and staff. That concludes our meeting tonight. Thank you.